They actually beat him to a pulp and stole the pot. The reason they were beating him because they wanted him to tell them where the next stash house was, and he wasn't going to do that.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Denkin, and I want to welcome you to Becoming the King of Pot, where we explore the true life story of Bruce Perlowin, a hippie, a family man, and a mastermind whose life mission was to change the world with marijuana. He turned his spiritual mission into one of the biggest marijuana smuggling operations that the U.S. has ever seen. He smuggled in over $1 billion worth of cannabis right under the Golden Gate Bridge. And guess what? He happens to be my cousin. Bruce, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to tell the stories growing up on how I became the King of Pot.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. You know, you did a lot of nefarious things back in the 70s and 80s, right? And, you know, we're going to talk about all of the stuff that you did from, you know, smuggling and moving around the world and all of your relationships and, you know, really what you were thinking, you know, as you were this criminal, right, if you will.
Yeah, I don't think we saw ourselves as criminals as much as outlaws and pirates.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, you don't see yourself like that, but the world sees you like that, don't they?
Sometimes other people, a big group, see us as freedom fighters delivering the product that my entire generation pretty much wanted.
Tell me what was happening in the world while you were in high school and how you were drawn towards pot.
Well, I was in high school right at the dawn of the Summer of Love. The Summer of Love was 1967. 1965 is when it really started. The discernible youth movement started that year. And there got Timothy Leary promoting LSD. You got Grateful Dead forming out in San Francisco. So that entire wave of the 60s hippie generation was just beginning as I was entering high school. So by the time it got to North Miami, where I was in high school, we were in the middle of this explosive, amazing, incredible generation called the post-war baby boom hippie generation. We were buying pot. We were selling LSD. We were going to Fairchild Gardens on the weekend, or actually we were skipping school, going to Fairchild Gardens because nobody was there, and we'd all take LSD or smoke pot. And that was an amazing experience because we're all the hippies. Imagine all the hippies in the largest subtropical botanical gardens in the world where they filmed Gentle Ben, the TV series. And everywhere you looked, there's Arthur and his girlfriend, there's your best friend, there's your brother, there's your ex-girlfriend, there's your current girlfriend. You just loved everybody in that park because we were the only ones there, about a dozen to 20 of us. And you had different, friendship love, girlfriend love, brother love, best friend love. It was like being in the Garden of Eden. That influenced me to want to help change the world and make the entire world look like that kind of environment. And like anything else, you start small. We would buy a pound. We'd make ounces in high school, and we'd put in, if you bought an ounce, you got a free pack of rolling papers. If you bought a nickel or dime, you got a little saying, make love, not war, different peace, love. Different sayings of that era. And we just sold them, mostly not so much to make money, but to make enough pot to smoke ourselves. Then little by little, it became a very lucrative entrepreneurial venture.
And then one of your friends asked you to hold a bale or something, right? Let's talk about, how that bale showed up, and then it really showed you how the real money was made.
Yeah, what happened, I had quit doing all drugs. I was doing yoga, meditation. I had a spiritual underground newspaper called Rainbow Bridge that I was making. I sold organic Shackley products, grew organic vegetables in my backyard. So I was straight and there was no heat on me because I wasn't dealing anymore for years, like 3 or 4 years. So a friend from Gainesville went away from high school to Gainesville. And back then, the pot would come in on boats into Tampa, the west coast of Florida, all over Florida, but in this particular load, it's west coast. The university kids there were taking the university kids in Gainesville. The university kids in Gainesville would bring it down to Florida, North Miami. So I was in North Miami, straight as an arrow at that point. living this spiritual health, organic lifestyle. And Jeff Tuckman, a friend, said, can I store this pot here? And I'll give you $500 if you let me store it here. So he comes down to Gainesville, stores it in the house. There's no heat on us. And if you sell any, you can make $10 a pound. Great. David Tobias and I teamed up. We said we had a tree trimming business. We were partners in the Tree People, which advertised in the underground newspaper we had. So we started selling. I think we sold maybe 17 pounds out of the 50, and made $170 plus $500. Now we're making decent money. The next time Jeff brought a bale down to store, we sold the whole thing. It wasn't even close. 3 days later, it was gone. The demand for marijuana in those days, and probably just today, is insatiable. All right, so 50 pounds came and went like that. And that started me off, us doing deals with other people, moving from bales to hundreds of pounds. And then I decided to move back to the land and left that small, I guess, 100-pound, setup, and that's what we were doing. It wasn't pots, pounds, or bales anymore. It was hundreds of pounds. And I decided I'm going to move to Arkansas.
Let's talk about that jump. Let's talk about that jump where, you go from holding on to a bale from your buddy, right? And then ending up selling it out, right? And then you got to make the connections to now you want to go unload boats, right? Isn't that the next step, right? And then, as you see other guys, tell us how that all worked out and the timeline on that.
All right, that's a bigger jump. Okay, first it was the bales, then the hundreds of pounds. All right, and 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 500 pounds at a time. Then I'm going to move back to the land. I moved to Arkansas on 40 acres. I am not doing any marijuana out there. It's Arkansas. I'm tree trimming and for a living. Back to the land didn't make it. Couldn't last. It lasted 90 days. Then I came back and moved from North Miami. I moved to a house in Fort Lauderdale. David Tobias was now partners with Jeff Tuckman, so we weren't partners, so I was on my own. And that's when we started going from the 100 pounds before I moved to Arkansas to now literally thousands of pounds of marijuana. I mean, it was just the amount of marijuana coming into South Florida and into North Miami, Fort Lauderdale area was literally in the millions of pounds. So I ended up dealing, 3,000-pound load, 8,000-pound load, 5,000-pound load. And
what's going on in your head at this point, where, you're not just have one 50-pound bale, right? And you're not doing 300-400 pounds, right, anymore. You're literally in thousands and tens of thousands of pounds. What's happening in your head? Are you scared? Are you worried? Are you just excited? Are you just, throwing the money up in the air and rolling around in the money? I mean, what's happening inside?
It was just extremely exciting. Okay, first of all, it was like Catch Me If You Can, getting away with it. That was a massive and major rush. Wow. All right. And part of that whole thing was I was always reinvesting my money into trucks, into vans, into boats, into renting more houses, into warehouses, into scales, into all these stuff you need, starlight scope, just having a lot of fun, scanners to watch the police. And it really wasn't that much heat in South Florida at that particular time. So getting away with it was an absolute thrill. And it came to the point where I said, wait a minute, I'm selling all this pot. I don't want to just be a salesman. I want to be a smuggler. Now, during that period, you're doing offloads for people. So a typical offload was, now there's freighters like crazy coming in. So the freighter comes in, somebody's going to offload it, their boat breaks down, and so they need you because you got other people with boats or you have your own boats or in a combination. So you'd wake up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, to get a call, and I needed two pieces of information. How far off is the freighter and how much do you have? If it was too far off, you'd need fishing boats. It was, 3 miles or 4 miles offshore, you use the speedboats. So I would contract with a group of speedboats or use my own, and they would pay me 25%, and I would pay the other offloaders 10 or 15%, and I would get the load to sell. So that's the offload portion of it. Now you're talking about tens of thousands of pounds, up to 50,000.
Right, so let's talk about this whole offload thing. So talk about what it's like, to jump into a boat, haul ass out into the middle of the ocean and unload a freighter full of marijuana.
Okay, well, I never did that part. I just coordinated it all.
Ah,
Okay.
interesting. Nice.
Yeah, so I was like the brains behind the operations.
Yeah.
So what that's like is you contract for, let's say Tom, Dick, and Harry. We have 20,000 pounds we have to offload. And you would rent what we called water houses. They're the big fancy houses in Fort Lauderdale, up the intercoastal, down these canals, and you'd unload into a dock. And there's a very specific formula if you knew what you were doing. A lot of people didn't know what they were doing and got busted because they were stupid. I don't know if stupid is the word, but they were inexperienced. So the technique is you pull your boat, either your yacht or your speedboat behind your house on the dock. You have a bunch of guys over to have a barbecue. So there's a reason for a bunch of people to be at the house. You're having a barbecue, so all the neighbors say you're having a barbecue. You wait until after the 11 o'clock news when everybody goes to sleep. Now, you got to be really careful because I forget, we do the statistics, something like 20% of people have insomnia, and maybe 2 or 3% are going to walk outside their backyard along the canal. So you got to watch for that, make sure everything's safe. Most people went to sleep, and then you're there, you have a reason to be there, the barbecue, and you offload into the garage. All right, very quickly. You have your vans in the garage. You don't have your vans outside in the front of the yard because people have been busted because the DEA learned about that, and they busted people because they would watch the vans and they'd see them offload after 11 o'clock news. We all knew that trick, all the smugglers. We all tell each other, and
So it was not really competition. It was just sort of everyone did it together?
Oh, absolutely. You were either selling someone's load, offloading someone's load, or bringing your own load in. And you're bringing your own load in a boat, bringing your own load in a plane. So we all worked together. There was no conspiracy laws. That changed where they had to catch you red-handed. So it changed that you could just say, I did this at this date at this place and get somebody convicted. That didn't exist back then when we started. And it was only a 5-year charge, by the way. That was the maximum sentence. We all worked together as a group. We shared information. Some guys would get the hot sheet, which was the list of the Coast Guard list of hot boats that they were watching. Other guys would get the frequencies that the DEA and FBI broadcast on. So there was those lists that we'd share among each other. You'd buy them, you'd trade, and we'd all work together. And you had to, because you have a freighter offshore and it's broken down. You better have the resources to know if your boat breaks, getting out there, and that happened often, maybe 10, 15, maybe 20% of the time, you had to have backup boats. And because if you didn't do it by sunlight, the Coast Guard's going to find that freighter and bust it. So we all worked together as much as possible. Some people did keep totally by themselves. Other people worked, with everybody. I tended to work with pretty much everybody.
I think the perception, especially for drug dealers or drug smugglers, right, these days is that it's about ego and power and money, right? But it wasn't like that back then?
No, that ego, power, money thing came in with the cocaine. All right, there's a very, very big distinct difference between the dealer that is attracted to cocaine. They wear gold, they have flashy cars, they're into guns. We're hippie, back to the land farms, okay? We had trucks. We didn't have fancy, Lamborghinis. Some of us did, but most of us didn't. But that was the coke dealers, and that was the big ego. That was, the guys that have low self-esteem. All of a sudden, they made $1 million, and they think they're hot shit. Anyone can make $1 million back then, and they buy a fancy house. Anybody could buy a fancy house. It doesn't make you anything special, and we all knew that. So we were more down to the earth people.
Yeah. So what's happening in your personal life as you start delving into, this life of crime?
In the beginning, before I went to Arkansas, I got married to Diane. We had a child, and I actually tried to go to day junior college and couldn't afford it because I had a new child and a new wife. So I had to go back to selling pot to make a living, which was very lucrative. And then she really didn't like it that much. I mean, she got used to it. But then we moved out to the land, to Arkansas, and that didn't cut it. So we came back. It was interesting time. It was the time of free love. So although I was married, I I was allowed to have other. No, when you're married, you're married. I didn't. I didn't participate in the free love version back then. Maybe earlier when it first came, but not after I got married. Um, and but then we got divorced. We split up, and then you have lots of girlfriends, and you have a lot of girlfriends. Right?
Yeah. And are they attracted to Bruce? Or are they attracted to the lifestyle, or are they attracted to the weed?
It's very interesting that's a great question. And I didn't know that. You're growing up, you're learning stuff about life. You're not sure yourself and you're not sure of anything. And you make a plan and hopefully it comes together. And I remember Darryl Boyd, he was my marijuana mentor. You don't just become the king of pot. You learn, and you learn from the pros. Darryl was about 3 years older than me. He gave me my first big load. I was living in North Miami. I made my first $100,000. Okay. That year I made $1 million total, but he really launched my career. And so now I've made $100,000, and I saw that the girls were like flies on rice, right? They just came out of the woodwork. Zoom, they're all over the place. I go, wow, this is interesting. I'm buying vans, and I'm buying, stash houses, and, the tools of the trade. And then I spent all the money. It was gone. It didn't matter, because if you didn't make $10,000, $200,000 a month, you were doing something wrong, or a week, actually, not a month, a week.
Right.
So I spent all the money, and I'm totally broke. And the girls were still there, like flies on rice. And I realized it wasn't the money that attracted to them. It was the self-confidence that you exude when you have all that money and all that ability, and you're doing something and it's working and you're being successful at it.
Sure. So it's power. So it's the power that they're attracted to.
I don't know if it's so much power or just self-confidence. Now, if self-confidence means that you exude power, then yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, don't you?
Yeah, because I did command, I was the boss even back then.
Right.
Before I was rocking and rolling out in California, I was the kingpin and had my own organization. People worked for me. So it was power and self-assured confidence that you knew what you were doing was actually going to work because of the experience. And, you make mistakes. Of course, everyone makes mistakes. I had boats that sank. I had planes that crashed. And that's how you learn,
Yeah.
And we learned by other people making mistakes. We always said, yeah, this guy, he was living in Fort Lauderdale, the idiot. He had, he's living in this big, fancy, expensive neighborhood, and they don't mow the grass. Everyone's grass is manicured, and this guy's got grass, up to your knees. And so they brought on heat, and sure enough, they busted him. It was a stash house,
Right.
You learn by your mistakes and other people's mistakes. And so the self-confidence you exude is what attracts all the women.
Okay, so you're learning from everybody's mistakes. Everybody's learning from you, and you guys are sharing all of this knowledge because there's no cell phones, right? There's no, you can't really communicate that way. But what were some of the mistakes that you made, right, that you had to do better the next time?
Well, other than, just typical planes crashing. Oh, you didn't put enough fuel. You miscalculated the fuel that your plane needed. You used old rickety boats. But I think that if I would focus in on a mistake I made, it was an interesting situation. I had a stash house, and George, my worker, was at the stash house, and Brian was at the other stash house. There was like $250,000 a pot in each one. And in one of them, the DEA and other snitches from the police, who were all corrupt back then, pulls up, and instead of arresting him, they actually beat him to a pulp and stole the pot. The reason they were beating him because they wanted him to tell them where the next stash house was, and he wasn't going to do that. They actually put a pillowcase over his head, cocked a shotgun, and pulled the trigger, but there was no bullets in the chamber. So he had to go to the hospital.
Wait. We gotta back up a little bit. All right, so you have a stash house, right? And you got some guy watching it, and then what happens?
Okay, a van pulls up, and they knock on the door. They go, we're here, and they say, DEA, police, and they go and they raid the house. George is the only one there. They put him in the bathtub, tie him up. They put a pillowcase over his head, and they put a shotgun to his head, says, where's the other stash house? I want the address. And George is saying, and they had hit him in the head a bunch of times with a gun. We had to take him to the hospital, get stitches. And he wasn't going to say, because he didn't want Brian to get the same treatment he was getting. And so he wouldn't, so they, cocked the shotgun, pulled the trigger, but there was no bullets in the chamber. They were just doing that to scare them.
Yeah.
And they stole the pot. All right. Now,
The DEA guys stole all the pot.
the DEA, they were corrupt as hell back then. I mean, if you look at the history of North Miami, one time I think they fired 80% of the police force. All right, but that was in a couple of years later. We tracked down who did it. You know, it was this guy. He told these other people. So I go and get a gun. And this is my mistake that I learned from. And I go to the guy's house with a gun in my front, down my front pants. I knock on his door, and he's not answering the door. And next thing I know, I see a police car slowly coming down the road. So I go and hide in the bushes in the front yard, and the police goes by, and they obviously saw me because he sped up and drove real quick. At that time, I knew he saw me. I started running through the backyards, and back there, I was here, and I'd run through this yard, on this street, this yard. So I'm just running through the yards and jumping over bushes. Dogs are barking, and I got this gun, and I finally get, I believe, about 8 or 9 blocks away, and I start walking down that block, and I take the gun, I put it under a trash pile because people would put their trash in there. And when I was at the front of his house, I was thinking, what the hell am I doing? What am I going to do, shoot the guy? And then, so we decided to back off, just go back to work and make another $250,000, which I did. I paid about that whole load off and the stolen pot off, and they fronted me more weight. And that's when they all wanted me to become partners with them as smugglers, because not only was I a good salesman, I was honorable and honest. So the mistake was trying to resolve things with guns.
Right. So during your career, right, what was your stance on guns after that moment?
It was, what are you going to do? Shoot it out with the police? Number one, if you're doing an offload, you're not going to do that. You're never going to win, because if you have a shootout, they're going to bring more police, and then they're going to bring, the Army, then the Navy, then the Air Force. You're not going to win against the authorities. So there's no sense having guns. We're nonviolent hippies. We believed in make love, not war, and peace. And there's 2 groups I never liked to work with. That was Mafia and CIA. And they were all over the place back then. Maybe the violent Cuban people, and cocaine dealers. If they were running around with guns, I didn't want anything to do with them, because it brought too much heat. I could never imagine taking somebody's life. I'm not God. I don't have the right to make that decision. And I inculcated that thought and that behavior throughout everybody I work with. If you want to hang out with guns, you're not hanging out with me. Now, we did have guns, a couple guns, a shotgun, because my brother Craig, he pulled a shotgun one time on one of the Bobs, Bob Sr., Bob Jr. That was a big smuggling operation we can talk about later. But, that was sort of a comical moment. But that was it. Learning the mistake was not to confront people with guns.
Sure. So let's talk about Craig and how you guys work together to really build this business. And, even though he's your younger brother, right, he ended up kind of being your protector, right?
That was the role he fell into, yeah. So we did, to start off with, I was rocking and rolling, and my mom found out that I was selling marijuana when I just when I left a bail at my house and growing up in her apartment. And one of our cousins would come down every year, Cousin Harry, and he found the bail, freaked out, got on the plane, went back to Philadelphia the next day. And so,
really?
Yeah. So I don't know if you knew Cousin Harry.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, he was a teacher, right, up in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Okay. So he, that's cool being cousins, all these people.
Right. Right.
So, and my dad yelled at me when he came home, and I yelled back, and I said, George was supposed to come and take the bail out of here. Wasn't supposed to be here when he came, and George fucked up. He forgot. Okay, there's a mistake. We left the bail in the shower, and Cousin Harry found it. So I yelled at my dad. So later, my mom said, why, you got to go apologize for your father. You yelled at him. You're not supposed to yell at your father, which is true. So I said, Dad, I apologize. I lost $30,000 And he goes, what? I go, yeah, I hid it somewhere in the house here, and I don't know where it is. And it's a whole week's earning. It's my whole week. Now, a week back then was like today, like 6 months, right? A week when you're...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a week's like
30
forever.
grand, it was you're doing very well in 1968.
Right. So he goes,
Yeah.
a week's income? You made $30,000? Yeah, and I don't know where it is. So so I apologized for yelling because I was upset. About 2 hours later, I go, Mom, Dad, I remember where I hid it. I go, where? And I go, right there in the credenza. So I open the credenza. I take out a brown paper bag. I pour $30,000 cash on the dining room table. Their eyes are bugged out, and they go, whoa, you made that much selling marijuana? I go, yeah. I go, you want it? I go, for your jewelry store? Because they had a jewelry store. They say, yeah. I go, okay, no problem. I'll make it again next week. So from then on, it was okay for me to be in the business.
So good old Aunt Helen and Uncle Leroy were okay, right? As long as you paid the VIG, right?
But they did say, promise me you won't get your little brother involved, Craig. Okay. Yeah. So I promised them I would not let Craig be part of my smuggling. So when George got ripped off and I was rocking and rolling, Craig wasn't a part of the organization then at that time.
Yeah.
However, one day Craig calculated, he figured it all out. He goes, Mom, I lost $100,000 last year because you wouldn't let me be part of Bruce's smuggling operation. He goes, I really want to do it. She goes, $100,000? Okay. so Aunt Helen went in to lose out on the income.
That is so funny. That, you're making a nice living, right? It's okay.
Yeah. All right. So then Craig became an integral part of my organization, and mostly just as a salesman. You know, he would take pot. He'd come down to the 6th Avenue stash house, and he would take marijuana back to Lakeland and sell it. And later on,
like big quantities. Was he doing ounces or pounds, or what kind of dealer?
I jumped back to the pound. I was doing thousands of pounds. He was doing tens of pounds. Right.
Right.
And
right.
then
so he was like your street dealer.
One of them. Yeah. But then when we moved to the Fort Lauderdale waterhouses, he actually got busted with 500 pounds, and that was a mistake.
Ooh.
All right.
Yeah. So tell that story. What happened?
So I said, whatever you do, never, ever let anybody follow you back to the house, the stash house. It's a stash house.
Sure.
Even though it was a water house. Typically, the water houses would be where you offload, and then you take it from there out to the farms out in the country, and that was a stash house. But this, we weren't using to offload at the moment. No, we weren't at all because we lived there. So it was a stash house. I said, don't ever let anyone follow you back to the stash house. Well, he was doing a 500-pound deal, and they followed him back to the stash house, and he led them back to the stash house, walked in the house. Bob Margolis, another high school friend, everyone from high school, you grew up selling marijuana. We all sort of moved up into smuggler to big dealer to street dealer to giant dealer to offloaders. We all did it all. So he was from high school. He was at the house, and Craig gets in there and gets busted with 500 pounds. So consequently, he couldn't, when we moved out to California.
So what happened? What happened to Craig?
Ultimately, he got probation. We had lots of money back then. That by the time it went to court, we were out in California rocking and rolling, making millions. And we hired the top attorneys, and they got him 1 year probation. And he couldn't be out in California during that period until he ended his probation, and then he came back out.
We'll get to California in a couple of episodes. But that's interesting that here it is. He's trying to work with his big brother, right? And he's the one who gets busted. Right.
Yeah. And so anyway, but there's some interesting big stories, which we'll tell next episode about, offloading big loads in the Caribbean and Cat Island, specifically in the Bahamas. Those are great offload stories, freighters lined up with millions of pounds in them. But jumping back to the free love episode, the free love story, when we were in my mom's house, when we had just gotten, right before we went to Arkansas, I was there, and at this point, I'm going back and forth to Gainesville. I'm picking up pot in Gainesville, driving it back. That was interesting. Diane and I, we had a plan. We made a bed in the back of a van, and underneath the bed, we could fit 500 pounds. And so we'd sleep on the bed. If a cop pulled us over, her job was to pinch Aubrey, our son, make him start screaming and crying so that the cop would say, let me get away from this van. It never happened, but that was our plan. Anyways, so there was a time where David would come over to buy us, and we'd have, like 500 pounds or 200 pounds in the bathtub. And he would take a pound of it, and approximately a pound, hand it to me. I would put it in a plastic bag, put it on the scale, take out a couple buds, or put a couple buds in to make it exactly 454 grams, which is 1 pound, or 448, whatever it is.
454.
Yeah. Oh, you knew that, huh?
Of course.
You grew up in that era too. A little bit later, but same.
I'm actually in the pot business now also, but the legal side of things. So yes, it's 454 grams to a pound.
Isn't it amazing that's been part of our lives over 50 years now?
Yeah.
Way over
crazy.
50.
So Bruce, you're in Florida. You are offloading or organizing offloading. You're selling weed to everybody in the state, driving it up and down. And your mentor, right, Daryl Boyd, what did he teach you, and how does someone become a smuggling mentor? Tell us a Daryl Boyd story and how you got hooked with him.
Okay, so earlier I mentioned I made my first $100,000 with Daryl Boyd. That load was very funny the way it happened. He did an offload, and he had a RV parked in his front of his house, and a couple RVs. And so I went there to pick up my RV, and there was 8,000 pounds in that particular RV. And I don't know what, I had trucks, he had a bunch of stuff. He has like a farming area. And so I go and drive away. About 3 days later, he calls me up. He goes, Bruce, you brought, maybe it was actually 2 days later or the next day, because you picked up the wrong RV, bring it back. I go, sorry, it's all sold. He goes, oh, that's okay. And, he was one of these guys that I looked up to. I'm a young, up-and-coming marijuana smuggler, and he was an idol. He was a hero. He's the guy who started off smuggling 50,000 pounds at a time. I started off with pounds. He started off with 50,000. Right. And he was just, Bruce, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do this. You do this, you do this. There's do's and there's don'ts. And he just taught me a lot of them all the time. I mean, his nickname is, he calls himself the gorilla because he's an alpha male prime, right? He bosses around alpha males, similar to what I became. But in the meanwhile, I watched him.
He's a big dude, too. He's a big stature, like he's very tall.
Oh, yeah, and a big beard, and and he was in the military. His brother Tracy, they were partners. He was in the special forces. They called them the Smith brothers because of the Smith brothers cough drop. That's what they look like. And he's just somebody that had a million pieces of very useful information that without that, I would have taken me years to learn on my own.
Yeah. All right. Well, more stories about Daryl Boyd and his brother and their exploits with Bruce Perlowin, the King of Pot, right here on Becoming the King of Pot, as we learn more about Bruce Perlowin and how he really became this massive kingpin. Bruce, any last words on episode number 1, my friend?
No, I think that covers it, although I just want people to understand the era in which this all took place. That was the incredible, amazing, colorful 60s and 70s and the years of the hippies, and then ultimately what our impact was on society today with marijuana and with the culture of the time.
Awesome. And next week we'll talk about the time that you guys took that money and donated it to the Jerry Lewis Telethon. And we'll tell that story, all right?
That was Daryl.
So, thanks for joining us. What's that?
That was Daryl Boyd that did that.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
I know. I can't wait to hear it. I know. We'll talk about that next week. Bruce, thanks for the incredible stories, and I look forward to chatting more next week.
Thank you, Todd. I do too.